We are living in wild times. I don't exaggerate when I say I feel that we're living on the cusp of some kind of revolution or some major social change. We're living in an age of extreme, I hate to use this word because it's become something of a cliche and loads of people have used it, but it's true regardless. There's rampant division. There are two gulfs that have emerged in this increasing bifurcation. The old centrist consensus of the 2000s is breaking down, and in its place there are broadly two sides. On the one hand, there's the far left, and on the other, there's the nationalist right. The people on the left, they want LGBT rights, they want mass immigration, they want open borders. They believe the very existence of borders is racist and nonsense. They just want the whole world to be a borderless utopia. It sounds like I'm straw manning them, but no, that is literally what some of them believe. I've spoken to some of them on YouGov, and I remember that is, in a nutshell, what they believe. They also believe in taxation of the rich. You've got that Gary Stevenson chap who's been appearing a lot on the internet. He's been doing the rounds on the internet, and he's been making a lot of appearances on TV. There's growing appetite, there's growing demands for some kind of wealth tax, and it does feel like there's also an emerging gulf between the rich and the poor. We're living in a day and age where most people in the younger generation, people of my age bracket, can't get out of their parents' houses, and they can't even afford to buy they can't even afford a down payment on a mortgage, let alone buy an actual house and start a family. And by the way, starting a family, that's an entirely different conversation on its own. And then on the other side, you've got the far right, the nationalists. They believe in more or less the opposite. They believe that we should be enforcing our borders. We should be taking action against the mass immigration that's been affecting our country for the past decades or century, depending on how far you look back. There's a rise in foreign ideologies like Islam, and not just Islam, but it seems like our entire democracy is being besieged by bad actors with foreign connections. Islam is just one of them, but then there's also Israel, the Mossad, and then there's foreign crime gangs who are setting up shop in our high streets all across the country, with those vape shops and those Chinese nail salons, selling drugs and things like that. And the far right pretty much wants a stop to all that. But I think it's getting to a point where neither side can meet along in the middle. I say neither side can meet one another in the middle. It's been broadly true since the mid-2010s, if you ask me, but it's especially true now. And I feel like we've reached a threshold, we've reached a tipping point where if there were any doubt up until now that there isn't a major schism across various social and political dimensions in modern British life, well, all of that doubt has been destroyed. I think what the events that have happened in the past, certainly in the past year or so, and even more recently, with the assassination of Widdicombe, which I'm going to discuss in great detail in just a moment, that alone, the various events that have happened in the past few years should thoroughly disabuse anyone of the false notion that we can all just hold hands and get along now, because we're going through... I haven't read the sources to back this up, but I believe we're currently enduring one of those cyclical periods of history where there's an emerging gulf between two relatively equal groups of there are two factions who believe in radically different things, and one wants total dominance and subjugation over the other. See, that's the thing. We're living in an age of division and sectarianism. And as I mentioned earlier, if there were any doubt as to that being the case in the past, well, what has happened fairly recently should convince all of you that we are not living in the 2000s anymore. We're no longer living in the age of the modern neoliberal political centrist consensus of the 2000s under Blair, Brown, and Cameron. Those days are over. Last year, I was going to make a video about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, but I was in one of those spells, and in the end, I never got round to it. But there's a lot to be said about what happened to him. I mean, I never really particularly... I remember briefly hearing and reading about Charlie Kirk, I think in around 2020, during the Groyper War, and when Nick Fuentes would have these live streams, and he'd have his own activists show up to his CPAC Turning Point events and ask leading questions that would get ordinary people to think about Israel's impact on Congress and the power of the Israel lobby and LGBT and demographics and stuff like that. And he seemed like a very bland and milquetoast conservative, although I understand he was highly accomplished and very intelligent, and more than anything, he was a man who more or less exemplified the ideals of conservatism, the marketplace of ideas, getting into having a debate with other people, because he was a very effective debater and communicator of ideas. He would tour around various university campuses, and he would engage in debate and dialogue with all these students who really wanted him dead. I mean, looking back, it's kind of incredible that it's taken this long for him to be assassinated. Don't misunderstand me when I say that, though. I'm trying to make the point that from the beginning, Charlie Kirk was sort of a marked man in hindsight, but it's still absolutely astonishing that now we've witnessed this happen. I think it was in November of last year when he was shot dead in broad daylight in front of an audience of tens of thousands. I never really gave him much thought while he was alive, but the day we lost him, I feel like we were all exposed to something that really changed everything. We were exposed to the side of the left, the true psychology of the enemies of free speech. And it feels like since then we've crossed the point of no return. We've crossed the Rubicon. There were people openly mocking Charlie Kirk's assassination. There were people making memes about it, people sharing the video of his neck erupting into a geyser of blood. I remember seeing that. That was pretty astonishing, honestly. I did not realize that people's necks could erupt into a fountain of blood like that. even speaking as somebody who's seen quite a few snuff videos and gore videos of the time, that was really something to see. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, if there were any doubt in the past that we couldn't just sit and engage in reasonable debate and discussion with the far left, and by the way, I'm not sure if I would classify myself as far right, because I hold some center-left views on things like economics, so I'd hesitate to call myself far right. But in this context, I'm definitely far right. If there were any doubt that we couldn't just try and be patient and exchange in a debate over the battle of ideas with them, well, all that doubt was dispelled when we lost Charlie Kirk. Some might argue that it happened sooner, when there were those attempted assassinations of Donald Trump, which, by the way, we haven't even heard much about. That's a whole discussion in and of itself. But anyway, looking back in hindsight, the death of Charlie Kirk was really quite an astonishing event in hindsight. It's really had a transformative effect on political discourse between the left and the right, in that it's causing the illusion to unravel that we're not in a state of total war with the left, who hate our civilization and who want to see it actively replaced and destroyed and replaced, rather. Anyway, fast forward to, what was it, 9 or 10 months in the future, there's been another politically motivated extremist killing of a political figure, of a divisive political figure, who for the most part was very skilled in debate and dialectic, who was an outspoken conservative, who'd made numerous enemies over the course of her lifetime. She didn't quite have the same international outreach or reputation that Charlie Kirk did, but she'd been a known quantity in the British political scene for many years, even though I hadn't really known that much about. All I remember about Anne Widdicombe is years ago, I watched this clip of Frankie Boyle on Live at the Apollo, which has since been cancelled, by the way, funnily enough, where he made a joke about Anne Widdicombe being incredibly ugly. And really, that is all I ever heard. That's all I remember hearing about Anne Widdicombe. Anyway, recently, a few weeks ago, she was brutally murdered in her own house by what appears to be a far-left maniac with a hammer, who drove hundreds of miles all the way over to her house in Devon, I think it was, broke into her house and clubbed her to death with a hammer. And we know virtually nothing about this man, by the way, because, oddly enough, all of his social media profiles appear to have been taken down. We know that he is allegedly an outspoken communist. I think he was a supporter for the Communist Party of Great Britain. So it's really not a stretch of the imagination to say that this would have been a politically motivated assassination of a public official for pretty much more or less the exact reasons that I was getting into when I opened this video. Because Anne Widdicombe, she was a divisive figure. Honestly, in my opinion, she was a member of Reform UK. She was against abortion and LGBT back when things were different, back when we had just made it legal for women to procure an abortion, and back when the conversation around gay rights and LGBT, and when gay marriage had become legalized. But since then, I mean, she hadn't been outspoken to the point of wanting both of those things banned publicly. Probably because if she had, she'd be thrown in prison. So I don't consider her to be that radical. Really, I think Anne Widdicombe was only as extreme right-wing as the mainstream media and polite bourgeois society would have allowed her to be. In any case, she certainly didn't deserve to be clubbed to death in her own house. But these are the times we're living in now. And, and even more recently, there was a minor scandal where this member of the Green Party, this Green Party supporter, he was wearing a t-shirt with a guillotine on the front and with the caption, "We're only making plans for Nigel." The implication being that if it were within his power, he would execute Nigel Farage. I mean, I certainly don't think that there's any other public figure with the name Nigel that he could be thinking about or referencing. And what you notice is this incident was reported to the police. This picture alone, it was shared publicly on the Green Party's Instagram page. Zach Polanski, he took the picture down, but he didn't ever apologize for it. He didn't publicly distance himself from the gesture. And that's kind of revealing, if you ask me. Oh, and as far as I'm aware, nobody has been put in prison over this. On the other hand, however, another thing I just remembered is I think it was a couple of years ago, there was a Reform UK councillor who put up this silly little post on Facebook saying, "Why are there so many Nigerians? We should melt them all down to fill our potholes," or something like that. He, after 2 years after this post has been on the internet, only just now he has been arrested. Anyway, this is how it appears to me. We're living in an age of increasing political division, but you tend to notice for the most part, it appears to be very one-sided. There's this great appetite, this great hunger for war and bloodlust from the far left to the far right, but this bloodlust doesn't appear to be reciprocated by the far right to the far left. And obviously there's a pretty good reason for that, in that just wouldn't work the other way around, would it? Anyone on the right wing who advocated violence for somebody on the far left would be chucked in prison. Anyone on the far right, anyone who isn't even on the far right, or who even makes something that could be partly construed as a threat of violence against someone on the left wing, can be chucked in prison. We saw this happen with Lucy Connolly during the Southport riots. There was a guy who chucked an egg at Jeremy Corbyn during one of his events. He was landed in prison, and this was a couple of years ago. I think this was in the 2010s. But around the same time, somebody lobbed a milkshake at Nigel Farage, and that person never saw any. The police didn't do anything about that person. They were even hailed like a hero by the local tabloid press. So anyway, we're living in an age of increasing political sectarianism. Well, actually, that's one way you could put it if you wanted to be neutral, but if you wanted to be more factual and to the point, what you would really come to admit is that the far left are out of control. I made this point in one of my earlier videos where I was responding to that guy who left a comment on my Make a Field Action Day video. The far left are psychotic, they're violent, and they are mentally deranged, and they are fanatical, and they want us dead. And for the most part, at least for the time being, it seems that the institutions, there's a tacit approval of their insatiable bloodlust, their sectarian, homicidal fantasies. We see that the institutions have tacit approval of this, and we know this because of how they act. I mean, because if it weren't the case that the institutions weren't secretly on the side of the far left, well, somebody would have been taken to prison over that T-shirt. Because I don't believe Zach Polanski officially sanctioned, that he officially, that he personally made the decision to let that guy wearing that T-shirt have his picture taken and be an official representative of the Green Party. And I don't believe that he should personally go to prison, but the guy who wore the shirt should, or somebody has to publicly answer for this. And we all know that this wouldn't fly if it were Nigel Farage. We all know that if somebody on the... for God's sake, but even now, 2 years after the fact, a Reform UK councillor is being marched off to prison. Well, he's been arrested, but who knows? Maybe he could see jail time. Because of a post that he made 2 years ago, which they've sat on for years, and only now they choose to act on it. So I guess what I'd wrap this video up with, the question I feel like I might put to the public is, what are we going to do in the meantime? Until we on the right, we who want our laws, we want our laws and our national pride to be restored. We want our opinions and views represented on the national level, on the political and national stage. When can we expect justice? And what are we going to do when these maniacs, these absolute psychopaths, when they up the ante? Because if you don't think that it's going to end here, well, I've got news for you. It's only going to get worse. I'm going to pause the video for now. Look, just how worse does it have to get before finally the pin drops? Before we finally had enough? And we show these people the door. Like, we finally take our country back. I don't know about you, but this country's an absolute shit show right now. Everything's falling apart. Immigrants are raping us, they're stealing our jobs, they're stealing our houses, they're killing us, they're ripping off our public services, they're taking this country out for a joyride. They're treating us like absolute mugs. We're constantly being browbeaten and told that we have to feel guilty because of who we are, because of what we are. Honestly, if we were called up as a young white Englishman, if I were called up for the draft tomorrow morning to go and fight for Russia, you really think I'm going to lay down my life for this clown show country? Absolutely not. So when's the day going to come where Britain finally changes into something that I would lay my life down for? And how much worse do things need to get before we reach that threshold? Two key questions which I hope the future will answer sometime soon.